Okay, picture this. It's May 10th, 1940. It's not even dawn yet. A young British lieutenant, a guy named Ian Roger English, is on the Belgian border, and he sees something that just doesn't make any sense. It breaks all the rules of war he's ever learned. What he was witnessing, well, it was the start of something that would not only decide the next phase of the war, but would completely rewrite the book on how to fight. And it's a playbook that's still being used today. To really get what happened, we have to start with a really simple but kind of mind-blowing question.
So here's the puzzle. That invasion? It shouldn't have worked. I mean, not in a million years. If you looked at the German army on paper, it was, well, weaker. So how in the world did this supposedly inferior force manage to crush France? We're talking the strongest military in Europe, maybe the world at that time, in just 42 days. The answer is the real secret weapon of World War II. It wasn't a tank, it wasn't a plane, it was an idea. A completely radical new way of thinking about war itself.
I mean, just look at the raw numbers here. It's almost comical. The Allies? They had more tanks, better tanks in many cases. They had more divisions of soldiers. They had the swagger of being the military power on the continent. And the Germans? They were still basically in recovery mode, handcuffed by the Treaty of Versailles from World War I. Any sane person, any military analyst looking at this matchup would bet the farm on an Allied victory. Germany should have been stopped cold.
And yet, 42 days, 6 weeks, that's all it took for the whole thing to come crashing down. That speed, that unbelievable velocity, is the clue. It tells you right away that the Germans' advantage wasn't something you could count, like tanks or soldiers. No, their real weapon was invisible. It was an idea, a philosophy, forged in the one place you'd never expect: total crushing defeat.
Yeah, to really understand how they won so big in 1940, you have to rewind the clock all the way back to 1918, when they lost. I mean, really lost. The end of World War I didn't just beat Germany, it humiliated it, it broke it. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you a strange kind of freedom, a freedom to throw out the old rulebook and start from scratch. So the Allies come in with the Treaty of Versailles, and it's designed to be a straitjacket. They tell Germany, you can have an army, but it's capped at 100,000 men. Oh, and no tanks, no air force, no heavy artillery. It was meant to keep them down forever. But for the guy put in charge, this general named Hans von Seeckt, this wasn't a cage. It was a challenge. He basically said, okay, you're telling me I can only have a small army? Fine. Then I'm going to build the most elite, most lethal small army the world has ever seen.
And his big idea was something called the cadre force. Now, this sounds technical, but the concept is brilliant. He made it a rule that every single soldier had to be trained to do the job of the person 2 ranks above them. Think about what that means. A regular corporal is learning how to be a sergeant is learning how to be a lieutenant, a captain is learning how to be a major. So what you really have isn't an army of 100,000 soldiers. You have an army of 100,000 potential leaders, ready to scale up at a moment's notice. It was an army of managers, of decision makers, all the way down the line.
And this army of leaders wasn't just about technical skill. It was built on a whole new philosophy of combat, a set of ideas that were so powerful, they were more dangerous than any Tiger tank or Stuka dive bomber they would eventually build. These ideas were the real secret weapons.
And the absolute cornerstone of this new philosophy was a concept they called Auftragstaktik. We'd call it mission command today. The idea is so simple it's radical. Instead of giving your officers a long list of detailed instructions, you just tell them the objective. You tell them what needs to be done, take that hill, but you let them figure out how to do it. This whole system runs on trust. It empowers even a young lieutenant on the ground to make his own decisions, to adapt, to exploit an opportunity the second he sees it without having to radio back to HQ for permission.
And this obsession with speed and initiative is perfectly captured in one of the core ideas from their officer training. It is better to make a good decision immediately than to wait and make a perfect decision later. Just let that sink in. They were literally taught that a pretty good plan executed right now is infinitely better than a perfect plan executed too late. Hesitation was seen as the biggest failure, because in a battle, windows of opportunity open and close in seconds. The side that moves faster, thinks faster, decides faster, that's the side that wins.
So if you're going to make these lightning-fast decisions, you can't be sitting in a bunker 20 miles behind the lines. And that's where the next idea comes in, Führen von vorn, or leading from the front. Guys like Rommel and Guderian weren't in some cushy headquarters. They were right up there in the lead tanks with the dust and the noise, seeing the battle with their own eyes. Now the downside is obvious. This was incredibly dangerous. German officer casualties were way higher. But the upside?
You could see, decide, and act in seconds, while your opponent was still waiting for a report to reach his headquarters. You could operate inside their reaction time.
And this idea of deep leadership, it wasn't just for the generals and colonels. This is maybe the most crucial part. It went all the way down to the sergeants and corporals, the NCOs. A German sergeant wasn't just trained to lead his squad of 10 men. He was trained and expected to be able to take over the whole platoon if his lieutenant got killed. He was thinking 2 levels up. Now compare that to the Allied armies. Their NCOs were fantastic, brave soldiers, but they were trained to do their job, not their boss's job. This gave the German army an incredible resilience. You could take out a leader, and another one would instantly pop up to take his place.
Okay, so let's put the pieces together. You've got an army of leaders. Everyone is empowered to make decisions. They have an obsession with speed, and they lead from the front. Now, what happens when you give that army brand new tools, like fast-moving tanks and radios to coordinate everything? Well, what you get is a new kind of warfare, a terrifyingly effective tactic that the world would soon call the Blitzkrieg.
You know, it's funny, the Germans themselves rarely used the word Blitzkrieg. That was more of a media buzzword. Their own military term for it was Bewegungskrieg, the war of movement. And that name tells you everything. The goal wasn't to get into a grinding slugfest with the enemy's strongest units. No, the whole point was to avoid their strength. It was about finding a weak spot, a seam in the line, and then pouring all your strength, your tanks, your planes, into that one spot like a spear.
It's almost like a recipe for victory, in 4 simple steps. Step 1. Find the weak point. They call this the Schwerpunkt, the point of main effort. Step 2. Don't spread your forces out. Concentrate everything you've got, tanks, infantry, dive bombers, on that one single point. Overwhelm it. Step 3. Punch a hole clean through their defenses. And then, and this is the absolute key, Step 4. You don't stop to clean up. You pour through that gap and just drive. Race for the enemy's rear areas, cut their supply lines, surround their headquarters. You're not trying to defeat their army. You're trying to paralyze its nervous system.
And in May of 1940, we see this theory put into devastating practice. The Allies were expecting the main German attack to come through Belgium, just like in World War I. So they rushed their best armies north to meet it. But that was a feint. The real attack, the Schwerpunkt, came through the Ardennes forest, a place the French High Command thought was totally impassable for tanks. The panzers just poured through, crossed the Meuse River, and in less than a week, they were at the English Channel. Just like that. They had sliced behind the main Allied armies, cutting them off from France completely. It was a checkmate.
There's this quote from a French historian, Marc Bloch, who was actually a soldier in that campaign, and it just perfectly captures the feeling on the Allied side. He talked about the Germans' embarrassing skill in appearing where they ought not to have appeared. It felt like they were teleporting. Of course, it wasn't magic. It was the end result of that whole system we've been talking about, a system built for speed, initiative, and shocking the enemy into paralysis.
But the story doesn't just stop there in the fields of France, because this tactical masterpiece, well, it couldn't prevent Germany's ultimate defeat. And yet, the ideas behind it were so powerful that they didn't die in 1945. In fact, they're arguably more influential now than ever before.
Let's be clear. This tactical genius was completely undone by strategic madness. You can be the best boxer in the world, but if you decide to fight 3 heavyweights at once, you're going to lose. And that's what Germany did. Taking on the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States, there was just no way their tactical skill could overcome that kind of industrial and numerical might.
But here's the fascinating twist. The winners started copying the losers. Smart leaders on the Allied side, especially guys like the American General George Patton, they saw what the Germans were doing and they recognized its power. And after the war, the U.S. Army and other Western militaries went back and studied everything the Germans did. They basically reverse-engineered their doctrine, because they knew that even though Germany lost the war, they had discovered the future of how to fight it.
And this is where it all connects back to us, right now. That German word, Auftragstaktik, today we call it mission command. And it's not just a military idea anymore. It's considered the gold standard of leadership, period. Think about the most innovative companies today. What do they talk about? Empowering small teams, setting clear goals but not micromanaging the process, fostering a culture of trust and initiative. That is pure Auftragstaktik. The lessons learned on the battlefield of 1940 are now being used in boardrooms in Silicon Valley.
So, in the final analysis, yes, the German war machine was ultimately buried under an avalanche of Allied resources. But what the campaign of 1940 proved, in the most dramatic way possible, is that for a time, a revolutionary way of thinking can absolutely trump superior numbers and equipment. It can make the impossible happen. And that really leaves us with a question that applies to everything, not just war. In any competition, in any business, in any part of life, what really matters more? Having the most resources or having the better idea about how to use the resources you've got?